Hello and welcome to the 43rd episode of Tailoring in Conversation. My name is Reza, and in this series I'll be talking to tailors, business owners, cloth merchants and other industry participants from all around the globe to gain a better insight into their worlds. My guest for today is Jon Moore. Jon is a British couturier specializing in women's wear. He began his career as a fashion design student at Kingston University in the mid-70s and worked his way up to becoming the design director at Hardy Amy's. He now has his own private clients and students, and in our conversation for today, we're going to be talking about his background, his time at Hardy Amy's, the differences between couture and men's tailoring, the influences of clients on the creative process, and much more. Let's go. Good morning, Jon. Thank you for making the time. I'm having the pleasure of speaking with you. We've had some conversations going back and forth in the last 2 years, I believe.
Yeah.
So now I have the chance to speak with you, and let me start by asking you how you're doing.
I'm doing fine, thank you very much. The sun's actually shining this morning, thank goodness.
It is. Well, I'm leaving to Croatia tomorrow,
Wow.
so this is my last day of working for this kind of last 2 years almost. So I am pretty much looking forward to that. Are you at your studio or at home at the moment?
I'm at my studio at home.
A studio at home. Same here.
Perfect.
So Jon, what I'd like to do is get into a few topics that I'm very curious about, and you have, let's say, a good few years of being in the industry of handmade garment making in the specifically couture, and but you also have been on a company that has also had connections and was on Savile Row, which was Hardy Amy's. But before we get into those topics, could you very briefly give us an overview of where you started, where you went, how the Jon Moore career timeline kind of is, so that we have a better understanding of where we're going?
Well, I guess, to be honest, the whole thing started with my mother. Mm-hmm. She was a needlework teacher.
Right.
And I then discovered actually lots of my great aunts were all dressmakers, tailoresses, shoemakers. The whole family came from Norwich, so there was a big basis there. And funny enough, you only find that later on. I think my mother's generation thought that hand skills and handworks were rather demeaning. And
right. Why was that?
Because she was encouraged to go and work in an office, which was more of a proper job.
Right.
So I went to a very traditional grammar school and was studying very traditional A-levels. And then I happened to stumble across a wonderful lady called Jill Jeffries, who had been a costume and theatre designer at Stratford-upon-Avon at the Royal Shakespeare. And it was her first teaching job. And where I was living, they decided to set up a sixth form college. So all the sixth formers moved out of their various schools, and we all went up to the sixth form college. And I was the first year intake. So it was a brand new school, which was great. And we had to do what were described as supplementary studies alongside our A-levels to broaden our education. Little did they know what was going to happen. So I took Jill's class, which was, I think, theatre and costume design, as an afterthought, because the ones I wanted to get into were full. So that's how peculiar this whole thing is. And I did two semesters with her doing this. And I think it was during the second term, she turned around to me and said, "Haven't you ever thought of becoming a fashion designer?" And of course, the answer to that question was no. I mean, my whole education had not been geared towards doing that. My whole education had been geared to go in the opposite direction, towards a university education. And I think parents wanted me to become a bank manager or maybe work in an insurance company.
Right.
Proper
And so,
job.
yeah. I mean, when she asked you about being a fashion designer, was that synonymous to a couturier, or were those things separate at the time?
I had no idea at that point about the differential of that. I suppose at that time I was I was aware of people like Calvin Klein, Valentino, Saint Laurent, This was 1974, that sort of time. So Calvin Klein was really starting to make a noise in America at that point with his new ready-to-wear sort of sportswear sort of type. So no, I had no idea about couture at all. And it was just an opportunity for what about fashion? And I jumped at the chance. So I then went off and did a dressmaking A-level alongside my English history and geography.
Right. What a great combination.
It was, yes, absolutely. And I was really cross I got a B rather than an A, but there we go. And then again, Jill was marvellous because the sixth form college had no idea how to get anyone into an art school. Not a clue. It was all geared towards university placement. That was what it was all about. So I was a complete maverick. And actually, my parents insisted that I applied for university places alongside applying for fashion school because they were really concerned that this was a dead end and I wasn't going to go anywhere.
Right.
They were really enthusiastic.
So do you think that the concern they had was because it was really a very difficult and, let's say, non-prosperous direction to go to, or was that their perception?
I think it was two parts to that. I think yes, they felt it was a precarious route to take, and certainly back then, when I went to this technical college to do my art A-level, there was a huge piece in the local press. Only boy taking needlework. I mean,
oh wow,
that was where it was at back then. And, so I got to Jill managed to move it all around. Anyway, I ended up going to Kingston Polytechnic, which had a really, really good reputation as a fashion course. I'd applied to St. Martin's and got into the foundation course, but I couldn't get onto the I couldn't get a grant to go. The local authority in Solihull, where I was living, said they had a foundation course at the Solihull Technical College, and I could do it there. And I couldn't explain to them that it was a huge difference going to St. Martin's than going to the local tech. But they wouldn't have it, so couldn't do that. So again, Jill was wonderful. She was not to be beaten. And she said, oh, well, we'll just apply straight to the degree course. Why not? I think because she had no idea, and it was completely green, she just tried things that no one else would have ever done. So I went off to Kingston with my suitcase full of clothes and patterns and all the stuff, and they offered me a place. And I was the first student they'd ever taken without a foundation course. So they actually also took another student on at the same time as a sort of balance. To see if both failed, then obviously this was a bad idea.
Interesting.
Repeated, but if one succeeded and the other one didn't, then it would, it was down to the individual.
I see. Well, it's a good way of seeing what works.
I think it was a sensible approach from their point of view. And in actual fact, from my point of view, Kingston was a much better fit in actual fact than St. Martin's.
In what ways would you say?
Because I didn't have any art background because of my education. That had all been squeezed out long ago. No, you can do art or chemistry, or you can do something maths. It was just all those choices were quietly and subtly just pushed away. So it just ended up with pure academic classes. So the great thing with Kingston, particularly at that time, was Kingston had a style. There was a very strong style, and you could tell Kingston students and Kingston drawings because there was this very, very strong graphic style, which you could learn. So whereas St. Martin's was a much more arty course and much freer, this more constrained way of doing it suited me fine, because it meant you could learn the technique to do these drawings. We used rotring mapping pens to all the line drawing.
Yeah.
Computerization, of course, in those days, it was all done by hand.
Yes.
And Pantone pens were the thing to give blocks of flat color.
Wow.
So you could learn that technique, which I did. So that got around my inability to draw very well.
I see.
What I was good at, and always have been good at, is working three-dimensionally.
I see.
Which, working as a tailor or a dressmaker is important, because you need to know that a body has depth as well as width. So that worked out fine. And the other good thing about Kingston was it was actually one of the things that was held against it slightly. It was described with a slight sneer, as a commercial fashion course.
Oh. Why do you think that was?
Oh, I think because there was this idea that fashion should be art.
Right.
And that's what you should be dealing with. Whereas the Kingston course was, Daphne Brooker was head of department, and she was brilliant. And she always insisted on talking about the fashion industry. You had to deal with that. So
do you think that St. Martin's was trying to prepare students for the more creative and open aspect of everything, and Kingston was preparing them more for the practical, all-round professional aspect of it?
Absolutely. I mean, Daphne was brilliant because she spent most of her time making contacts with industry. So I think every single project we did was linked up somehow or other with industry. So it was either a fabric supplier who was supplying the cloths, or it was a thread manufacturer, or a rainwear manufacturer. It was somebody. So, and of course, in hindsight, it was an incredibly clever trick, because not only did you get to know people in industry, people in industry got to know you. Yes. So at the end of your 3 years, if you needed it, you had a huge pool of people that you'd worked with, for, presented stuff to. So you could then, chase them up and say, look, how about getting me a job?
Yes.
It was a really good way of doing it, I think.
I think so too.
I had a great time at Kingston. It was wonderful. And that was where the couture thing came in.
Right. Okay. So that's the next chapter.
Yes. So one of the senior lecturers at Kingston was a guy called Richard Knott, who had worked at Valentino. He'd been a Kingston student. He'd gone to work at Valentino, and then he'd come back as a lecturer at Kingston.
I see.
So he was the guy who taught me how to drape. And he was the one who he often talked about what they did at Valentino and how they did it. And, so that was my first introduction to that. And then at the end of my first year, 2 of my dresses that I'd made in my first year ended up in the final year collection. Right. Which was, again, quite unusual for a first year to get something in the final year show. Yes, I did that, which was nice. And obviously Richard must have lined someone up. Anyway, representatives from Valentino were at the show, and they offered me a job at the end of the 3-year course.
And what year was this?
1.
No, I mean, like
1976.
76. Okay.
Yeah. So I was going to graduate in 79.
Okay.
So that was the first time that the couture thing sort of popped up. And then I think what then happened was, because the college knew I'd got this job placement at Valentino, they allowed me to sort of drift into a world of couture.
I see. That's good. Yeah.
Well, it was sort of good, but of course it was also ultimately rather limiting, because you were narrowing your opportunities going forward.
Was that because you had to choose for a specific firm, and then
No.
Why would you say it was limiting?
Well, I'll tell you when I got to the end of it.
Sure.
Limiting.
Yeah.
So, you know, I drifted through my 3 years at Kingston, you know, and I guess my approach got more and more sort of couturified, I suppose. I was doing a lot of tailoring, double face coats, I don't know, embroidered evening dresses. I mean, all sorts of things. In those days, also we did quite a bit of fur design with Saga Mink, and I won that twice. So you know, that was quite. You know, it's nice to be able to put mink coats in your final collection.
Yes, absolutely.
So that was all great. And when I did get to my final collection, a great company called Jacob Schlapfer in Switzerland sponsored me and gave me 2 beautiful pieces of diamante encrusted fabrics. I made a black double face coat and a double face evening jacket, and you know, it was all very lovely, but all quite rarefied.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So that was all great. But during my time at college, of course, as the way these things happen, I met someone in London. And at the end of my course, I decided I didn't want to go to Italy. I wanted to stay in London.
Okay.
Oops.
Right.
So that's why I say it was limiting, because then, of course, I made the decision, right, I didn't want to go to Valentino. But I had a collection and a sort of, you know, I'd gone down this very rarefied couture route.
So I have a question. I would imagine that for most people who are interested in fashion or interested in couture, but haven't solidified their style or their vision for their career, would be very happy with a position at Valentino at a time where it was actually very much active in the handmade couture stuff. So how did you process the decision of not going there and rather staying in London? What was the better option you had in London that made you not to go to Italy, even if it was for like 6 months or something?
Well, you make silly decisions when you're a child. So.
Do you regret the decision?
Oh, I often question it, up and down, what might have happened, what might not have happened. But going forward, I think what ended up happening was great. So I can't complain. But yes, I often wonder what would have happened had I gone.
Okay.
So I don't know. So Daphne, of course, was then presented with a problem. Because from the college's point of view, of course, it was terribly important to get students placed in prestigious jobs because it reflected well on the course. So the fact I wasn't going to take this job at Valentino was a problem because that was a sort of a big star on her chart.
Yes.
So she sent me off for an interview at Dior in London. Dior used to have a couture house in London on Conduit Street. It's where Sketch is now.
Right.
And it was run by a guy called Jon Lamberg. So I went and had an interview with Jon Lamberg. And I came back to Kingston and said, no, I didn't want to work there. I didn't like that either. So I think in desperation.
How come you didn't like Dior?
Dior London at that time had closed its couture workrooms, and it was definitely on the way down. It was It felt dead, quite frankly. It didn't feel like much of a live business, and it just didn't feel right. So then, in desperation, Daphne sent me off to Hardy Amy's.
I see. Okay. And how would you describe Hardy Amy's at that time?
When I had no idea about it at all when I went in. I just took my portfolio and went off and found number 14 Savile Row, and I just went in with my portfolio. Once I got in and was shown up to the studio, I met Ken Fleetwood, who was design director. I was going to be his assistant. The whole thing just felt like I'd come home. You know, the studio with bolts of fabric and dress stands, and it all just felt yeah, I recognize this world. I understand this. This is fine.
Yeah. Okay. So, for me being on Salvador, I have heard stories about Hardy Amies, but you know very well that the Hardy Amies today is pretty much non-existent.
Well, I've gone entirely, sadly.
Yes, exactly. So, how would you describe Hardy Amies at the time where you were going there every day at work? What was the atmosphere like? What were the daily jobs? What were the dynamics like? And because I'm really curious to know what it was like at that time.
Well, I joined in June '79. Straight as I finished college, I went straight to Hardy Amies as a studio assistant. And luckily for me, I think the previous studio assistant, Jackie Marks, had also been a Kingston student. She'd also worked at Valentino. So it was a curious sort of replication there. But Jackie's great skill was sketching. She did beautiful sketches. That wasn't my skill. So Ken and I had to work out a way of working together. So what it turned out, what Ken actually could do, but he did masses and masses of sketches. He could sketch fantastically well. He had no idea really how to translate a sketch into a garment.
So he didn't have the practical skills of pattern cutting or making
no. And if he picked up a piece of fabric, he ended up sort of screwing it up into a ball. So I'd always leap up and take the fabric off him and say, "No, I'll do that bit." And
right.
So we very quickly worked out a way of working together, which was very successful. So the house, when I first got there in '79, was a marvelously exotic and peculiar place. Most of the vendeurs, the sales staff, were ladies, foreign ladies who spoke French. There was Madame Nina and Madame Lisette, and it was a funny place to start working as a 21-year-old. Most of the staff were in their 60s, I suppose.
Right.
But it was a beautiful. You might remember the building. It's a beautiful building built in 1724. Classic sort of couture house. We had the boutique on the ground floor. Then you went upstairs, and there was this huge, wonderful showroom, and then the couture fitting rooms at the back. And then on the next floor up were the studios and Hardy's office next door. So I'd go upstairs to the studio every morning and deal with whatever it was I needed to deal with first thing, have a chat with Ken. And then basically my day then started off with going around the workrooms and seeing what they were doing and what they were working on, and whether what they were doing was what Ken and I thought they should be doing.
Right. So when you were a design assistant or a studio assistant, how did you know what work you had to do for that week or month? Who made the schedule? What was it like? Were you allowed to make your own schedule, or someone made it for you? What was that like?
Well, I was sort of shadowing Ken quite a lot of the time, and certainly when I first started, I was doing that a lot. And I think one of the first things Ken did was said, "Oh, well, you can deal with the wedding dresses."
Why specifically wedding dresses? Because I can imagine that they're difficult.
No, not really. I don't know. They were fun to do, but I think Ken didn't want to be bothered with them.
Oh, okay.
He found it a bit of a bore. Well, he was happy to do the very grand weddings.
Right.
You know, if a duchess came in with her daughter, he'd be happy to deal with that.
Yeah.
Mrs. So-and-so coming in from wherever. He was happy to let me get on with it.
Okay.
And going back to your earlier question about what it was like, of course, was it 79 or 80? Margaret Thatcher came into office.
Right.
And there was a huge sea change at that moment. Because, of course, this was a couture house dealing with wealthy clients. Well, this sea change of Margaret Thatcher coming in just brought a huge sort of, I don't know, enlivening, I suppose, of
Wow.
the business, because suddenly all these people felt, I don't know, re-energized, I suppose.
I see.
Of course, we were starting to move into the 80s, where money and show and glamour and all of that suddenly became exciting. And there was a big revival at that moment in couture generally. Of course, La Croix opened in Paris during the 80s. I mean, there was a huge explosion, and people were having parties and dinner parties, and people wanted to get dressed up. So that was a great time to be working there, because it suddenly sort of burst into life, which was great for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yes.
Yes. So I got on with dealing with wedding dresses. That was sort of my first bit, was do that.
So you've also been design director, and you've worked your way up from studio assistant to design director. Now, is that something that happened because you focused on becoming the design director, or did circumstances open their way for you to fall into that position?
A bit of both.
Okay.
I pushed really, really hard in the first 10 years. You know all about that sort of 10-year sort of gestation period as tailors and what have you. That seems to be a sort of benchmark. If you can do 10 years, then you sort of get a gold star and you can start moving forward.
Right.
So I pushed very, very hard, and in '89 I became a company director.
I see.
So I'd moved then from studio assistant to women's wear designer, and in '89 I was made couture director.
Okay. And what were your responsibilities as couture director?
Well, they were pretty much the same as they'd been before. It was just they had to think of a name to give me. But
right.
it meant I sat in on board meetings, so I could see what was going on the business side, and that's that's when the progression starts, where in a weird way you start moving away from what you were actually trained to do. And you start getting more involved in the business side of the business, the fashion industry side of it. So you start to get more involved in that, which was interesting, because you felt frustrated outside of it, not being able to influence what was going on. So it was good to be able to get round the table. Even in reality, I couldn't do very much when I was round the table, but at least you were sitting there listening to the conversation.
And do you think that all the years that you spent there observing the clientele, observing the work, working with your colleagues, like every company has politics, navigating yourself through the politics of it, seeing society develop, do you think that those things prepared you for the role of couture director from a business aspect?
Absolutely, totally, yes.
So how did those things prepare you? Because it wasn't that you went to business school and then became couture director.
Well, importantly, of course, starting to deal with clients prepares you for that. You build up your negotiating skills. I mean, as the couturier at Hardy Amy's, it was up to me to design the dress for the client, find the fabrics, work out the price, tell the client how much it was going to cost, negotiate with the client to get them to agree to pay. All of that was all part of the job. So you had to get quite clever at negotiating and dealing with all of this. So that set you up very well going forward. It was a good training ground, and you needed to be a psychiatrist and a diplomat. That's
very well said. So Jon, do you think that for a company at that time like Hardy Amy's, where you were a director, do you think that you would have been a better director had you been solely a businessman, or do you think that the fact that you knew all the work and all the details that goes on into the creative side and the production side is even more important than just being a business savvy person?
I wish I'd known more about the business side.
Okay.
I wish I had more. I wish in hindsight I'd known much more about the business, how that worked, and
can you specify
how the boardroom worked and how you negotiated in a boardroom and all that sort of thing. Would have been if I'd had more knowledge of that, it would be useful. I had to just sort of learn on my feet and find out. Suddenly you were presented with a set of accounts, and and other directors would be quite happy to make you feel uncomfortable and ask you questions about the accounts. I've never seen a set of accounts before, so how am I supposed to read this? What's supposed to be going on here? But you learn pretty fast.
I see. And a follow-up question: do you think that if we speak about apprenticeships, do you think that apprentices who are engaged in just like a making side, like a maker's role, like a coat maker, trouser maker, whatsoever, do you think that it's in the benefit of the businesses to teach those apprentices at least basic business skills specific to that company?
I saw your previous podcast when you were discussing apprentices, which I thought was really interesting. And I honestly think actually it would be helpful, because I don't think a lot of times those apprentices are sitting in the workrooms feeling disgruntled and undervalued.
Yes.
I understand some of the pressures and constraints that the people who are employing them are having to deal with.
Yes.
The vast majority of our businesses are not flooded with money.
True.
It's always an ongoing battle to keep the whole thing, the ship balanced. I mean, it's always, unfortunately, that's always been the case. And it was certainly the case at Hardy Amy's. So I think if those people were more aware of what was going on, then they might be prepared to give people a little bit more leeway. And I'm sure the majority of those trainees or apprentices, when they leave that job and think, I'm going to go and get a better job somewhere else, they find that in actual fact there are similar problems where they go to the next job, or if they start working for themselves, then they wake up and realize what a lot of hard work there is to make money.
Yes. Well, there is a dilemma that I don't know how this will be solved, but I think it's worth thinking about, is that it isn't a secret that most apprentices and most trainees want more money and should get more money, because the wages are very low and the pay is very, 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 like for London standards is almost nothing. But at the same time, that company does need to have, like you say, a good amount of cash to be able to provide that money and sustain that, so that it's not like 1 month you get a good check, but then the month after you're pretty much fired and made redundant. How do you think that companies can create a fertile ground where the business can flourish more than it already is, whereby the staff can get paid more if they are underpaid, without destroying basically the company with that?
It's a difficult one, because some trainees want to engage and want to get more involved, and are eager and hungry to do more. And those ones need to be recognized and encouraged. There are, of course, other workers who are just very happy to come in, sit down, make buttonholes all day long, and go home again. And they don't want to do anything else, and they don't want the responsibilities of dealing with any of that. It used to be quite interesting when we do a big wedding dress. We'd often invite the hands up from the workroom to come and meet the client and see the finished dress. Now, you'd have thought that they'd be thrilled and excited to get up there and have a look.
the opposite.
Often it was an absolute struggle to get them out of the workroom and upstairs. Oh no, I don't want to do that. No, I don't want to. No, I don't want to do that. I feel embarrassed. It's awkward. I don't want to do that. Blah 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 blah. So I found it so odd that they didn't want to get up there and see it, but they didn't want to have to deal with that side of the business. They were perfectly happy doing what they were doing in their workroom amongst themselves, and they didn't want to have to do the front of house stuff, which is perfectly fine.
Yes, I kind of like thought that because obviously if you are what you call it, I can't think of the word, but if you are a tailor who has had years of experience, you can bring value, you are very productive, you can train others. It's a lot easier to justify a higher wage for someone like that than someone who is just in their first 3 weeks of training. And in that aspect, I think the deal is a little bit kind of like it's a weird deal, because it's something like, from the student's end, it's like, you pay me what London is charging me for living costs in return for the time that you have to invest in me and the attention that you have to give me. And without me being knowledgeable or as productive as a senior tailor, as a qualified tailor, let's say. And I sympathize with the businesses in that aspect, because it is very difficult to justify that. But then, how can you train someone if they are not being paid? So, okay. One other question I'd like to ask you about Hardy Amies is, what happened to Hardy Amies? Why did Hardy Amies fade away? And because I believe that this will happen inevitably with some other Savile Row companies or other tailoring companies that are well established, and couture companies. Do you have a theory or observations that you think?
Life changed.
Life changed.
That was the major problem. Life changed. I mean, when I was first designing at Hardy Amies in 79, 80, we used to design morning dresses, afternoon dresses, cocktail dresses. I mean, who the hell wears a morning dress anymore? Who wears an afternoon dress? I mean, life has changed. I mean, where do you wear a great big ball gown anymore, apart from the Met Gala? All of those social situations changed. Fashion, I always say, is social history reflected. And couture houses existed and provided clothes for a clientele who lived a certain lifestyle. Well, that lifestyle has gone, no longer exists. So people don't need or want those clothes. They're pointless. When I was first appointed as design director, I did my first collection, and I deliberately I wanted to impress Hardy, and I did a fabulous collection, very beautiful collection with wonderful double face coats with matching wool crepe dresses underneath them and amazing picture hats, and there was one in white and one in yellow and one in turquoise blue. They were fabulous. The show was beautiful. We didn't sell anything.
Right.
And that was the problem. It was all very well doing these beautiful couture pieces, which were amazing, and I loved doing it. But I was also responsible for the bottom line, and I was responsible for the turnover. So if I wasn't getting any turnover from these sorts of clothes, I realized I had to change tack.
I see.
And it wasn't that I didn't like doing that. I loved doing that. But in 96, that was becoming irrelevant.
Must have felt terrible.
Well, it was sort of sad, but then also a challenge. Okay, how can I reinvent this and still be true to couture techniques and still be true to the Hardy Amies style, but come up with things which were more modern? I mean, that was the important thing. And I remember having a terrible screaming match with Hardy over hats.
What happened there?
Oh, I hadn't shown any hats in the collection. And I said,
Right.
oh, well, no one wears hats anymore, so
Yeah.
there's no point showing them. And he said to me, oh, don't be so ridiculous. He said, I've just been to the Duchess so-and-so's memorial service at Westminster Abbey, and everyone was wearing a hat. I said, well, of course they were, Hardy, but that's not real life.
Right, right, right. Okay. I'd like to present you with an idea to understand the situation better. You said one of the reasons that Hardy Amy's as a company faded away was that life changed. Now, there is a business cliche, and I don't even know to what extent this is true, but I think it has some validity, and you know about this. It's the cliche of you come up with something and sell it to people who actually don't need it, but you market it in a way so that they feel like they need it, etc., etc. Do you think that tailoring companies or couture companies that have now that are now struggling with, because life changes, the way people dress change, they struggle with that one particular aspect of creating new markets for the products that they are designing and developing? Or do you think that that's completely irrelevant and it's really the clientele and the way they dress and the things that influence them which influences the couture company or the tailoring company?
Oh, absolutely, totally that way around. That is absolutely the way around it is. I mean, couture houses are merely reflecting what's going on. We reflected what was going on in society. You can't, a couture house can't force people to wear ball gowns. I mean, it's not going to happen. They want them, they'll come and ask for them, and you can do them. So absolutely, I think that's the way around of dealing with that. Hardy had always had this theory, a menswear theory, that menswear evolved and the most formal parts of menswear dropped off the top. And then the next garment came forward. So he would go back to, he started off at the riding jacket in the 1790s as the first sort of tailored suits.
Right.
You had a jacket and matching trousers, going through, of course, to the frock coat in the Victorian times. And then you had Edward, Prince of Wales, wearing a lounge suit and bringing in a tuxedo jacket. And the frock coat dropped off the end. And hardly anyone wears, no one wears it anymore. You don't see frock coats around. So the lounge suit sort of stepped up. White tie and tails, again, was the most formal. Hardly ever worn at all anymore. I mean, I don't know if you've ever made a tail suit. No. So I mean, that's dropped off. So it keeps on moving up. And unfortunately, I think we're almost there. Eventually, I mean, how often do you wear a dinner jacket these days?
Not often.
Not often, no.
Definitely not for dinner.
No, exactly. So, you know, that's almost fallen off the end.
Yes.
So we're just left with the lounge suit. And I think, unfortunately, that's teetering on the brink as other forms of clothing, more casual clothing, sportswear clothing is coming through and replacing. I mean, for instance, you see people now turning up at the Oscars in an evening suit and a pair of trainers.
Yes.
How is it going to be before someone turns up with an evening jacket, black joggers and trainers?
Yes.
And then someone's going to turn up in a bedazzled tracksuit, I guess. I mean, you know, that's where it's going to go, I suspect. I'm not saying I'm happy about it, but that's, you know, what happens.
Yes, they do have. Although I do like the name bedazzled tracksuit. it does sound very powerful. So, as we are kind of like concluding, it is the case that clients very much so influence and pretty much dictate to some extent what the couture companies and tailoring companies are making. Because the influence, I guess, of tailoring and couture companies is not that extensive as maybe a tech company that also happens to organize 20 other events which have you at the center of it. So okay, if we go on a smaller scale and we talk about just clients and how they influence the process. You've dealt with plenty of clients who were so yes, exactly. So if you would boil down all your experiences with the clients that you've worked with, in what fundamental ways do you think a client influences not only the individual who's making for them, but also the process of design and creation, and to some extent, a large number of clients influencing the company itself, the specific clientele to the specific company?
In my experience, I mean, the two things, working for Hardy Amy's and then working for myself. Hardy Amy's as a brand had a style and a point of view. So if a client came in to ask for a dress, then whatever I did would be within the house style. I remember on one occasion a bride coming in and she wanted this very, very frilly, fluffy dress. And there was a designer back then who was called Gina Frattini, and she did these huge fairy tale fluffy dresses with masses of frills and everything all over. And I just said to the client, look, you ought to go to Gina Frattini because this isn't our style. And I learned pretty early on that there was no point taking on those jobs because every single thing I did, which I felt was improving the dress, the client felt was making it worse. So there was no point going there because you were going to lose money. So,
do you think there is a way to prevent that?
Well, yes, suss it out early on and make sure that you know the client understands what your style is. And if they've come to you because they want your style, or whether they come to you just because they want you to make them something.
I see.
That's the difference, I think. That's what makes a couture house and not a dressmaking establishment.
I see.
Because a dressmaker will make whatever the client asks them to make.
Yes.
Whereas a couture house will say, well, no, that's not a Hardy Amy's garment. That's not what we do. So we don't do that.
Okay. And so, yes, you were saying in the different ways that the client influences the...
So, a client would come in, when I was working for myself, my main client, she'd tend to send me an email and just say, usually come in September after she'd been away for a holiday over August. She'd be thinking about her wardrobe and say, I've got gaps in my wardrobe. I need this and I need that and I need something else. So she'd give me a rough parameter of, I need these sorts of things. So then it'd be up to me to come up with ideas that would fill those briefs. But of course, my ideas that would fill those briefs. So I would then go on them. I would select fabrics and I would design things which I liked, which I thought were appropriate, and I would then sell them to the client. So yes, the client influences what you're doing, and of course you're designing in those instances. And a lot of times when you're working in the couture, you're working with clients who have been with the house or with you for a long time. I mean, some of my clients I'd worked with for 30 years. You get to know them very well over that period of time. And the colors they like, the sort of fabrics they like, their lifestyle, the sorts of styles they like to wear. So that informs your designing as you move forward.
Do you think that a couturier or a tailor or a designer knows better what the client should be wearing not only in terms of appropriateness for the event, but also like, hey, based on my vision and my understanding of design, color, form, texture, all of that, these are the things that will make you look good, even if the client doesn't agree with them. Do you think that that level of, I don't want to call it authority, but that level of specialization really has to be there, present during the process at all times? Or do you think that if the client feels bad in something, even if it makes them look good, they just shouldn't be wearing it?
Oh, of course. And if in the end, if you can't persuade the client, if you can't bring the client with you on the journey, then you've failed. As a designer, as a couturier, or as a tailor, if you can't bring the client along on the journey, then that's no good. One of the best parts of my job, I always felt, was a client would come in, invariably it'd be the mother of the groom rather than mother of the bride. She was feeling, diminished by the whole process and, second best and all the rest of it. And you could then, design an outfit for her to flatter her figure, use a great color, which would make her look good, and then fit it beautifully. And you could see fitting after fitting after fitting how she grew in confidence and happiness. And at the end of it, when she finally puts the final dress on, you can see them beaming with delight because they can see themselves looking good. And that's what I think a couturier's job is, to make that happen. And that's the best part of my job.
Yes. What do you think are the crucial things that one must know about to be able to give sound advice on style and what fits the personality or the character of that person best? Because we both know that because someone knows how to make a suit or a dress doesn't mean that they would make
the right suit or the right dress.
Yes, exactly.
Making the right suit and the right dress with the right collar and the right length.
Absolutely, yes.
That absolutely is I think recognizing the client and dealing with the client that you're presented with. And I think that's particularly where couture is so useful, because of course each garment is made individually for that individual person. So
to specify, when you say individually, you don't mean just another suit in a different fabric. You mean individually, specifically from scratch.
Yeah, from scratch, exactly. That's the essence of couture.
Yeah, and I have to add another layer of specification. You don't mean the pattern is made from scratch. You mean the design of the garment is made from scratch.
Exactly.
Yeah,
because the client's body informs the design process.
Right.
Because I can remember a friend locally wanting me to make her a trouser suit, and I padded up the stand for her, so I had her replica to start working on, and I designed the trouser suit. But when I started putting the cloth on the stand, because of her particular figure, I suddenly realized that in actual fact I could drape it in a more interesting way than I had actually designed, because of her particular figure. Wouldn't have worked on anyone else necessarily, but because of her figure, it worked on her. So that then became a particularly individual garment for that particular person. And similarly, I had other clients, one client who was quite dropped on one side. And it always used to amuse me. I used to think, well, if anyone ever takes any of these jackets, they go, oh, she always looks so fabulous, I want her jackets. And if they put her jackets on, they would look terrible.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have fitted anyone else apart from her. And that's the magic of couture. That's the magic of that individuality, that you can just make things particularly for that one particular person.
Yes. So I think this is a great kind of like route to take. So tailoring, bespoke tailoring, is also made for the individual, but it isn't couture. So
you don't have that constant changing of the design all the time. You have the cut of a bespoke jacket, which hasn't actually changed much in over 100 years, maybe even longer. That lounge suit jacket that was worn by Edward back in 1900 or 1905 is exactly the same jacket that's being cut now. Okay, with proportion changes and all the rest of it, but it's very much the same cut. So you have a different challenge in a way from the challenge I have, because you have to make that classic cut work on everybody, whereas I can make different cuts, completely different jackets for every single individual peculiar shape I'm presented with. So but we have different challenges.
So would you say that that is the main difference between couture and tailoring? Because if I would say, John, what is really the difference between a handmade suit made by a tailor and a handmade suit made by a couturier? How do I understand the differences between couture and tailoring?
I think that if you look at those two garments, there's very little difference in the finished product. It's the process by which you get there.
Okay.
Because your bespoke garment is drafted flat on the table. And that's how you create from measurements your starting point.
Yes.
Whereas the couture, we start the other way around and we pad up a stand to represent the client and then start working on that in 3 dimensions to create the garment. So the starting points are different. But
so why would you say that why can't, maybe a silly question, but why would a couturier not be able to start from a flat pattern, and why do they usually drape?
Because I feel that you can create a much better garment for a woman by draping it on the stand than you can by mathematically flat drafting it.
Is that because of the complexity of the figure?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's one of the differences, I think, because women have busts.
Yes.
And men don't, as such. The suppressions you have to deal with within women's wear are so much bigger most of the time than they are with men. You've got a bust measurement which could be very big, going down to a small waist and coming back out again to a larger hip measurement. Well, men aren't like that mostly. You've got a more. You don't have as much variation because again, with a woman, you can have a woman who's got, I don't know, a 36-inch bust measurement. She may not have much bust. She may have a very broad back and a small bust. Or you could, in the opposite way, have a client who's got a tiny frame and a minuscule back, and then a very large bust on the front. So trying to do that flat is difficult. So it certainly in my world, working in my world, every single garment was draped on the stand, and every time it was approached the same way. So it's the way I grew up. It's what I know, and it's what I'm comfortable with, and I understand that process because it was the process I was taught and grew up with.
Yes, that makes sense. So you could say that somehow the fact that, and I guess that couture developed the way it developed because it was catering mainly for feminine figures and females. Yeah. And so had it been the other way around, and if it was catering for more men, then maybe the process of production would also have been different.
Yes, because I don't think there wouldn't be that vast variation. And whereas you know what it's like if you try and persuade a guy to have a 3-button suit rather than a 2-button suit. 2 weeks to decide whether that's too much for them to deal with or not. I'm not sure. There's no other guys in my office who've got a 3-button suit. I'm not sure I can do that. I think that's too much. I'll stick with the 2 buttons. Whereas, of course, in women's wear, if you show a woman the same jacket she had last season, we can change the color. They look at it and you go, but I've got that jacket. I don't want that jacket. I want a new jacket that's a different shape, different style, and a different color. So it's a completely different sort of way of looking at it.
Why do you think that is?
That's a big question I don't know the answer to. I do not know why that's the case, but it was certainly at Hardy Amy's every season you had to come up with a new jacket, a new design, something that was different from what you'd had last season. So the sales ladies would come out with their clients and say, look, this is a new jacket, this is, and it's not the same as the one you had last season, so there's a reason for you to buy this one because it's different. And whereas making it 3 buttons rather than 2 was not gonna make it.
Yeah. I have a question about mastery, and the question is something. Well, I'll give an explanation and then I'll ask the specific question. So you know that if you really want to become good at something, you have to single out one task almost, and then just do it for years and years and years and years until you become a magician in it. And then if you have become a magician in it, then maybe you can focus on something else. It's like, a piano player doesn't play all the instruments. They may be able to play other instruments, but they just play the piano all the time. So based on that, I see men's tailoring being quite limited in the design of the garment. A very good activity that allows you to perfect a suit, because you're either a trouser maker, coat maker, or a cutter, and you're pretty much doing the same design over and over and over. And with couture, it seems to me from the outside, as an outsider who doesn't know much about couture, it seems that the designs are constantly changing, which then requires a different construction most of the time. Then the figure varies a lot on top of the designs, and so are the fashionable fabrics and the materials being used, plus what you say, how society dresses. How does the process of mastery work in that sense, where you can't focus on just one thing and everything is changing?
You've got to be a jack of all trades. You have to. When I was working, I loved that. I don't think I could do what you do. I think it would drive me insane. I loved making a tailored jacket for 2 weeks. I'd want to make a chiffon dress next.
Yes.
Because it's different. And it would require different skills and a different mindset, and handling is different. And then once I've done that chiffon dress, then I'd quite like to make a wool coat. Because again, it's different. And that's what I love about what I've done, is that it can constantly change and you're constantly doing different things. You're making a bias cut satin evening dress one week and then doing a Donegal tweed tailored jacket the next. And I like that because it allows me to do different things. I don't like producing the same thing time and time and time again. I find it boring. I used to work with a wonderful fitter at Hardy Amy's called Manu Raymond. She was fabulous. She taught me so much, and she had initially started working with Madeleine Vionnet in Paris in 1926.
Right.
So she had a great pedigree. And she, the lady, Madame Petit, who taught her at Madeleine Vionnet, had been trained by Monsieur Worth, who began the whole couture nonsense in Paris back in the 1850s. So there's a link right the way back, which was wonderful. But Raymond only ever liked making one sleeve.
One sleeve?
Yeah.
Do you mean one sleeve on a garment or one type of sleeve?
One sleeve. So she'd make the one sleeve and perfect it, and then she'd give the sleeve to one of the hands and say, right, now you copy it. Because she wasn't interested in making the other one because it's boring. What she wanted to do was make the first sleeve, perfect that. once it was
Yes.
perfected, she wasn't interested anymore. She passed it on to do the next, okay, well, someone else can now, I've done it. That can be replicated by someone else. You don't need me to make the replica.
Right. So she was the model maker.
Yes, I've done the hard work. I've come up with the genius idea, and now you can copy it.
Right. So to bring it back to the mastery thing, I do still believe that if you are doing something for a very long time, even if it isn't the same thing, you are mastering something. And if I would say, just for simplicity's sake, if you are a tailor, let's say if you are a coat maker, then what you master is coat making. If you are a couturier, let's say on the production side, not the design side, on the production side, but you're making all these different garments all the time, what is it that you master? Likely.
You have to master it all, I guess. I mean, you have to. Raymond always used to say, you must be the master of your fabric.
The master of your fabric, right.
You must control your fabric. If the fabric controls you, you've lost the plot. So you must be in charge of the fabric. So that would be important because then you can make the fabric do what you want it to do. So
the master of construction.
Well, and because often the fabric is the construction. You're working on.
Oh, right. That's also an interesting.
Frost, you're working in taffeta or grogram or whatever it is. You're in the couture. The starting point is the fabric. The fabric dictates the design. The fabric dictates what it's going to be. As soon as you pick up that piece of fabric, I can immediately see what it could be because the fabric does. And that's the starting point. And Hardy always used to say, "Dear boy, honor your fabric." In other words, use the beauty of the fabric, use what the fabric has to enhance the garment and to make a beautiful thing. Don't chop the fabric up into tiny little pieces and machine it all back together again. And then you lost so much of what is beautiful in that fabric.
It's a very interesting point, because from what I've experienced is that tailors really have a way of constructing their suit. And as soon as a fabric doesn't work well with that construction, they start to blame the fabric and kind of like curse the fabric.
Yeah.
What you're saying is completely the opposite. It's like your construction should serve the fabric, not the fabric the construction, pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is very inspiring, I think, because that's where you can be creative as a tailor. Because, there is this
but you
almost like...
do that to an extent with tailoring. I mean, you can make a decision. Okay, I'm going to make this as an unstructured jacket. It's going to be unlined. I'm not going to fully canvas. I'm going to, because of the fabric or the garment you want to make. So you do make decisions. You don't always go, right, this is going to be a fully canvas jacket, blah, 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 and it's going to be done like this. You do make decisions.
Well,
the makes the decision. I don't know.
Well, I would say that if it's made by a tailor or a company who is really strict on their house style, then they wouldn't really change the structure of the garment that much, whether it's a soft jacket or a hard jacket. I've never seen a tailor say, well, I usually make a garment like this, but for this fabric, I completely changed my.
Sorry about that. Go away.
No, that's okay. It's actually funny because it sometimes will happen to me as well, so that's okay. No, but I've never seen a tailor say, we always make this style, but for this fabric we chose to do something else. Because if they decide to go unlined or do something fancy, they won't change that, the canvas or the shoulder pads or the overall style. But that's kind of like, I guess, where tailoring can become boring for some. I would like to see tailoring have a little bit more of that, I don't know what to call it, openness, like the openness that couture has,
Creativity that brings.
Absolutely. So when I was, I think I was around 16. Yeah, when I was 16, I had a gap year because I studied originally sound design, and before I was kind of like accepted, there was 1 year where I wasn't accepted, and then in that year I had a gap year, and me being very interested in how computer games were made, I studied game design for a year.
Wow.
And in game design, there was a particular part which was about character design, and how you design the characters for a game. And so that links to character design in animation, but also character design in cinematic films. And what I kind of like always took on board was that knowing what the character of a film, for example, should look like based on their story, and focusing on that helps the tailor to recognize the character that their clients have and kind of like allow that to take the best form it can take. Mm-hmm. And to do that, one just cannot simply go with a house style. In tailoring, at least, there you have to be able to say, sorry, we do a soft shoulder, for example, but you would look ridiculous in a soft shoulder, or vice versa.
So you'd be better off going somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. So
I've always said to friends who've asked me about tailoring, I said, well, you have to find the tailor that makes the jacket you want, because the tailor makes his jacket, and it's not going to that tailor and saying, well, I want this and I want that.
Yeah,
it won't happen.
He
might say he'll do this and he'll do that, but you'll end up with his jacket, because that's what they do. That is the jacket. So you need to find the right tailoring house that makes the right style to suit you. To an extent, of course, that also happens in couture, because, if you came into Hardy Amy's, again, you get a Hardy Amy's style garment.
Yes, It
wouldn't be a John Galliano, it wouldn't be a Alexander McQueen. I mean, it's not going to happen. That isn't there. So although it looks like there's lots of variation within that mix, again, there is a strong house style which doesn't change.
Yeah. Okay, John, I've written down a few things based on our conversation. I'd like to do a speed round with you. I have a few words, and if you can say in one word the first thing that comes up your mind, we'll begin. So, are you ready?
Yep.
All right, okay. So, hand skills.
Very important. Essential.
Okay. Theater.
I don't know what to say about that. No idea.
Fashion designer.
I don't know what to say to that. No idea.
Okay. Style,
crucially important. More important than anything else.
Right. The most inspiring couture house for you?
Oh, God. Balenciaga. The original.
Yes. Yeah. What do you think of how it's currently doing?
I love the original. He was genius. Amazing.
I believe you. Glamour.
In the eye of the beholder. It changes all the time.
Right. So, 3 crucial skills to master if you want to become a couturier.
Patience.
Right. The essence of couture.
Personal, private luxury.
I like that. Beauty.
Again, in the eye of the beholder, it changes all the time.
So I have 2 other things, and if you want to elaborate on those 2 things, feel free to do so. Why do you think that people like to make beautiful things? The ones who do like to make things, like to make them beautiful.
For me, It's it's a passion, a desire to try and create something that's perfect, or as near to perfection as I can make it. It's a ridiculous, endless chase because you never get there. And I always said, the moment you make that perfect garment is when you stop, because there's no point in going forward anymore. The constant striving for this unachievable perfection.
Right. And the other one is, why do you think that, all things considered, people enjoy teaching other people? Why do we take pleasure in showing others how to do something, whether it's how to chop an apple in 4 fantastic pieces, or to build some construction, or teach them some life philosophy or something?
The reason I taught and I started teaching was that I, like you, I wanted to pass on the skills that I had acquired over the years, which had been generously shown me by previous people that I'd worked with, like Manon Raymond and Mr. Michael and Miss Rita and Hardy and Ken. I mean, all of those people who shared their knowledge and experience. And I wanted to pass that. I felt obliged to pass that on to someone else so that it can continue to live. And what you're doing at the moment, trying to get that jacket out there so that it won't die and people will be able to carry on and understand in the future whether they wear those jackets anymore or not, but at least they'll know where they came from and how they were made.
Right. Okay. I've got 3 more. So, Savile Row.
Yes, Savile Row. Quirky.
Oh, interesting. I've never heard that. Hardy Amy's.
Oh, Hardy Amy's. A complicated man. He was an amazing guy. He could be monstrous. He could be fantastic. He was an incredible stylist. He had a really strong point of view, and he taught me so much.
And then, last but not least, Jon Moore. Well,
I don't know. I think I've been very lucky to have had a great career, and I've been very lucky that I was part of couture while it still existed in London. It doesn't exist anymore, sadly, and there's very little couture left in the world. So I'm thrilled that although I came in on the shirt tail of it right at the end, at least I got a glimpse into that world and was able to experience it, which has been wonderful.
Well, Jon, thank you very much for making the time today to speak to me. And
lovely talking to you.
I've learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to see you in person soon.
Indeed, lovely. Thank
you.
Goodbye.
And that was Jon. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation. If you'd like to see more of Jon, you can follow the links to his Instagram and website in the description of this video. If you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, please let us know, and we sure hope to see you again in the next episode. Until then, bye-bye.